Tęsiame laidą Nauja diena ir apie karą Ukrainoje bei Kinijos vaidmenį šiame kontekste. Kalbame su Lietuvoje šiuo metu viešinčiu tarpparlamentinio alijanso dėl Kinijos įkūrėjų ir vykdomuoju direktoriumi Luke de Pulford. Mr. Pulford, great to have you with us.
Good afternoon.
Interviu vyks anglų kalba, tarp atsakymų aš išversiu jums ir į lietuvių kalbą tai, kas bus pasakyta. Mr. Pulford, the current situation in Ukraine, it has been described as the biggest humanitarian crisis since World War II. How would you evaluate the current humanitarian situation in the country?
Well, it is deeply worrying. Already at this stage, we know there are well over 1 million refugees. So just for context, at the very height of the Syrian humanitarian catastrophe in 2015, it only reached these numbers. And it has reached those numbers with the Ukraine situation in a week. That gives you an indication of what we're facing here, an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that we haven't known since the Second World War.
What scale could it be in the end? What's your prediction?
It's very hard to say, and it depends a lot on the international community's response over the next few weeks. It could be as many as 3 million. Some people are speculating even more than that. Vast numbers of people needing to find places of safety and to get away from the Russian aggression that they're having to endure at the moment.
Mūsų laidos svečias sakė, jog labai jaudinanti situacija šiuo metu yra susidariusi Ukrainoje. Milijonas žmonių, kaip ir žinome, pabėgo iš šalies per savaitę. Galbūt tas skaičius sieks ir 3 milijonus artimiausioje ateityje. Galbūt skaičiai ir dar labiau išauks. Viskas priklausys nuo vakarų reakcijos. Mr. Pulford, does the West and the leaders of the West do enough already about the humanitarian crisis and the whole situation that's taken place in Ukraine currently?
Well, yes and no. In one sense, the international community coming together in order to impose exceptionally strong sanctions on Russia, of course, sends a very strong message to Putin. But much more needs to be done to address the humanitarian aspect. And this is a coordination problem more than anything else. There haven't been enough meetings of ministers with responsibility for refugees to work out, who's going to take who, what's the integration plan going to be. And for that reason, we have a huge backlog of refugees at the border, particularly of Poland, who are finding themselves in very difficult situations. But there is something more to say around that, which is even more important. It's all very well to have visa schemes and to have integration schemes. But if people can't get to them, it's no good. We need humanitarian corridors to enable people to get to places of safety. And that, at the moment, is what we're really struggling with.
What's the checklist in this situation, and how difficult is it to solve it for the Western countries, and how long the process might take? What's your opinion?
Do you mean the process around the war or the process around refugees?
The whole process of integrating those people into the communities of Western countries, the whole process from start till the end, from the moment they cross the border till the moment where they start creating their lives in the countries in the West?
Well, I think there are a couple of things to say. It's an excellent question. The first thing is that we have never got this right. So if you look at the past history of mass movements of people, even over the past 6-7 years, every time there has been a mass movement of people provoked by a conflict, we have handled it disastrously. Again and again, it's been the same thing. We must not do that this time, and we have the opportunity to forge a more coordinated and creative response. Just look at what happened with Afghanistan and the scramble to try to help people there only earlier this year. And hark back to 2015 and the Syrian refugee crisis and what happened there. We can't allow that to happen again. So I would say on the one hand, yes, we need more coordination. How long is this going to take? It's very hard to answer. It's not going to happen at all unless there's some real initiative taken by European ministers coming together, ministers beyond Europe, ministers from all democracies to come together to work out how they can help Ukrainian people. We need all of that work to take place if we're going to stand a chance of being able to assist in a timely, in a fair manner, these Ukrainian refugees who are so desperate at the moment. So I can't give you a direct answer to how long this will take. It depends on the amount of political will and the amount of political energy which is spent on it. At the moment, that is clearly inadequate. We have divided, disaggregated policies across Europe. We need to have some coordination and some agreement amongst ministers in free world democracies to try to deal with this pressing issue.
Pašnekovo paklausus, ar vakarai daro pakankamai šio konflikto kontekste, buvo atsakyta, jog ir taip, ir ne. Sankcijų požiūriu vakarai daro jau pakankamai daug ir daugiau nei yra darę praeityje. Humanitarinis aspektas yra kiek sudėtingesnis, nes nėra išspręsta kol kas tarp vakarų šalių. Europoje kas priims pabėgėlius, daug jų yra įstrigę pasienyje, dar nėra tinkamai koordinuojamas vizų gavimo procesas, nepakanka humanitarinių koridorių ir šiaip jau vakarai niekada neišsprendė jokios pabėgėlių krizės teisingai. Sunku pasakyti, kiek tai užtruks šiuo atveju, tačiau kuo skubiau, jeigu norime apskritai padėti Ukrainai, yra reikalinga koordinacija veiksmų tarp visos Europos ministrų, visų demokratijų ministrų. Trukmė ir sėkmė šio proceso priklausys nuo politinės valios. Mr. Pulford, speaking of the humanitarian corridors, Russia keeps promising and breaking its promises here, or at least they keep misleading the West on this aspect. What would be your commentary about the humanitarian corridors and what needs to be done by Russia, by other countries maybe, to make sure that evacuations take place from the cities where there's war taking place?
This is an extremely difficult topic to address because it is practically unprecedented. It's highly unusual for humanitarian corridors to be deliberately attacked, which seems to be the case in Ukraine at the moment. Let's be very clear about this. This is a war crime. I mean, these are the kinds of things that should land Putin in The Hague, prosecuted, if the Russian army continues to preclude people from leaving Ukraine, civilians, women and children. Then the international community is going to have to rethink its current approach, because it cannot be the case that we allow civilians to be slaughtered in Ukraine, in their tens of thousands, perhaps even more than that, because Putin will not let them leave. This is a clear violation of international law and something which has to be dealt with appropriately, and we cannot just stand by and watch it happen.
Is there enough attention paid to war crimes that Russia's very likely committing in the war?
Well, what I'd say is that the new chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan QC, has moved very fast in order to proceed with the investigation in Ukraine at the moment. And as you know, within the framing of the International Criminal Court, that means investigating all parties to the conflict. But it's very clear, in my mind, who the aggressor is here, who the perpetrator of the crimes is. And that fills me with some hope that the international rules-based order will be able to assert itself. One of the problems that we've had around China and Russia and authoritarian states in recent years is it has seemed as if they can act with impunity. It's very hard to bring China to book for its violations of human rights. For example, what's happened to the Uyghurs in the northwest of the country. There is no international court that can hold them to account. So it's extremely heartening that the International Criminal Court has taken the action it has. And I hope that sooner rather than later, we will see Putin in the dock for his crimes against the Ukrainian people.
Kalbėjome, jog nebuvo tokių precedentų, kalbant apie humanitarinius koridorius, kuomet būtų reikalinga tokio masto evakuacija pastaruoju metu. Dėl to sunku pakomentuoti tai, kaip galima išspręsti šitą karo nusikaltimų situaciją, jeigu Rusija toliau bus nusiteikusi trukdyti žmonėms evakuotis, trukdyti sukurti humanitarinius koridorius, per kuriuos žmonės galėtų pasitraukti iš šalies. Mūsų pašnekovo teigimu negalima leisti taip skersti civilių, nes vėlgi tai yra karo nusikaltimas. Vakarai jau ėmėsi veiksmų šią temą. Kaip žinome, naujas vyriausiasis Tarptautinio baudžiamojo teismo prokuroras jau pradėjo bylą bylą šiame teisme, todėl mūsų pašnekovo teigimu vilties yra ir galbūt teks susimastyti toms autoritarinėms šalims, kurios laikė iki šiol save nebaudžiamomis, kaip kad pavyzdžiui ir Kinija kai kuriais atvejais. Mr. Pulford, speaking of China, China is one of the world's great powers, at least in some aspects in international politics. What is the role of China in this war, in this aggression coming from Russia in Ukraine?
Well, this is a very difficult foreign policy situation for China, because anybody who has dealt with China will know that they are very firm on non-interference and sovereignty. It's on that basis that they defend their actions in Hong Kong. It's on that basis that they object to people talking about the heinous persecution of Uyghurs, the genocide of Uyghurs in the northwest of their country. And it's on that basis that they believe that nobody should have an opinion about Taiwan. So for them, for their ally, Russia, to be behaving the way that it is, clearly undermining the principle of sovereignty and interference in other sovereign states' affairs, for them to be seen as supporting that is very dangerous for them in terms of their foreign policy. So they are trying to keep everybody happy. They are trying to keep the international community happy by at least holding back from supporting Russia too much, but they're also making clear that they stand by Russia. Now, my view of that would be that it is all a deception. The truth is that China stands to gain economically from the sanctions which have been imposed on Russia, because Russia will become very heavily dependent upon China as its only expanding market for oil and gas and for many of its other goods and services. So China is going to become increasingly important, increasingly powerful to Russia. But I think more than that, and this is the thing that we should pay attention to, China has been supporting, Chinese state industries have been supporting what has been happening in Russia since the war. I'll give you an example. A company which claims not to be state affiliated, but to all intents and purposes is Huawei. There were reports that were published today saying that on the day that the internet started to fail in Russia, immediately Huawei was there to offer services to try to get the internet back up and running. And in major news outlets in China, they were reporting that Huawei had come to Russia's aid in its hour of need. What does that tell you? That tells you that Chinese industry and that the Chinese state stands firmly behind Russia, regardless of what they're saying to the rest of the world. The question is whether or not we will make the same mistakes that we've always made, which is believe the deception of the Chinese Communist Party, and I sincerely hope that we will not.
On CCTV4, we saw a symbolic gesture of a news host wearing blue and yellow while hosting the show. What does this symbol mean, and how are such things possible in China?
Well, I think, generally speaking, what is acceptable for citizens to do in public, and certainly for state media broadcasters to do in public, is set by the state. So if the state organs in China have signaled that support for Ukraine or qualified support for Ukraine is acceptable, then that's what people will do. And now, bearing in mind what I said before, China is trying to balance things out here. They're trying to maintain their relationships with the international community at the same time as maintaining their relationship with Russia. And those things are strongly in tension. So it's quite helpful for them to make it look as if there's some diversity of opinion within China about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I think it's on that basis that limited expression of support for Ukraine has been allowed, but we shouldn't be deceived by it. We know where China stands in this conflict. We know who their closest allies are. And only today, Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, said in a press conference that the relationship between China and Russia was rock solid. Those were his words. So I think we can take him at his word and know that any deception to the contrary is not to be believed.
Thank you very much. It was a big pleasure to have you on the show. Pašnekovas paklaustas apie Kinijos vaidmenį šioje situacijoje teigia, jog tai sudėtingai apibūdinama situacija, labai tvirtai Kinija yra apsisprendusi nesikišti į kitų šalių reikalus, todėl kad pati turi situaciją susidariusią Honkonge. Honkongą saugo Kinija šiuo metu ir laiko tai savo vidaus reikalų, lygiai taip pat kaip savo santykius su Taivanu, bijo, kad bus atkreiptas dėmesys į šiaurės vakaruose Kinijos vykdomus genocidą primenančius veiksmus. Rusijos elgesys, kišantis į kitos šalies teritorijas, kėsinantis į jos suverenumą, nepadeda palaikyti to naratyvo Kinijai, dėl to labai aiškiai Kinija savo palaikymo Rusijai neišreikš, jo labiau, kad ekonomiškai išloštų iš Rusijos ekonominio kolapso, bet valstybinė pramonė Kinijos vis dėlto padeda Rusijai, palaiko jo šitoj situacijoje. Pavyzdžiui, Huawei pasiūlė interneto paslaugas, taip pat žiniasklaida iš dalies prisidėjo skleisdama Rusijai palankius naratyvus, bet klausiau pašnekovo apie vedėjos aprangą vienoje iš Kinijos naujienų laidų, kuri buvo geltonai mėlyna. Valstybė, aišku, pašnekovas teigia, nustato taisyklės tokiu atveju, jokios improvizacijos ten negalėjo būti ir turbūt, kad Kinija ieško balanso ir pozicijos netgi šalies viduje gali nesutapti, gali skirtis laikysenos vienoje srityje ir kitoje srityje. Iš esmės, Kinija ribotai palaiko Rusiją, bet čia nereikia apsigauti, kad yra kažkokios tvirtos pozicijos vienu ar kitu atžvilgiu. Kita vertus, ta oficialioji pozicija turbūt buvo įvardinta Kinijos užsienio reikalų ministro, kuris pareiškė, kad santykiai su Rusija tvirti kaip uola. Daugiau apie Rusiją, apie karą Ukrainoje visiškai netrukus kalbėsimės su buvusiu užsienio reikalų ministru Linu Linkevičiumi. Likite įsijungę Lietuvos ryto televiziją.